the great thing that we see in this story of the stripling warriors is how the cleansing and healing power of Christ can move generationally as well. So the parents were healed, but still needed something. They still needed this limitation. That limitation no longer existed for the children because they took the right steps. And it reminds me of the adage of strong men create good times. Good times create But this is an example of strong men and strong people, the Ammonites, creating good times, creating strong children.
We are Saints in the South, your source for gospel growth and good times.
Right. Welcome to another episode of Saints in the South. Man, this is episode 234. How are y'all doing? 234. And this week we've got myself, Kenny. We've got Average Joe, Rogue Bishop, and guest appearance by Jacob Hatcher, my stepson. He's sitting in with us here. He's with us briefly between Germany and Utah. Just got home from Germany and going to Utah.
Literally between Germany and Utah.
Literally. Yeah. I guess chronologically, yeah.
With a specific bias towards Utah in this case.
That's right. All right. So this week we've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of good stuff in the Come Follow Me. But before we get into that, let's talk about what's happening in the world. And so since Jacob's joining us, he's going to kick it off for us this week with the world news.
We're all from the South. We're all from the South. We got fear people and we're not afraid to stand our ground.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of works out. Speaking of Europe, this comes from over in Europe, although I wasn't party to this. I want to make this clear. I have no part. No, but apparently it seems that very recently Ukrainian forces have invaded and taken some territory in the Kursk region of Russia. So they're pushing back. Russia is still occupying eastern Ukraine to a good extent, but they pushed through into this less inhabited region, more to the east and more to the south. And apparently, from what I understand, it looks like it's probably the first time that there's been an invasion and a real holding of territory in Russia since World War II, which is gigantic. Wow. I mean, it's been a superpower. It's been untouchable for so long. It was, the Soviet Union back then, of course, but even now, Russia, the government of Russia, the land of Russia has not been invaded in this way in a long time. And now, it's coming back around.
How long has that war been going on? Or Ukrainian-Russian?
I mean, gosh.
Goodness. It's wild,
I think it depends who you're talking to.
A few years, right?
I talked with Ukrainians there while I was over the summer in Germany. I met a couple of Ukrainians, and they talked about when they thought of the war, to them it's been happening a lot longer. And when we think about it, to them this war is not, it didn't stop back in maybe 2016, 2017, and then start up again in 2022. Although to us, I think we think
hot to cold to hot again.
Yeah, exactly. It went through there was a breathing period, maybe a resting period. There is a lapse or the eye of the storm or some sort of calm period, but it wasn't. I mean, it was never like Ukraine and Russia didn't have problems during that time. They weren't exactly at peace. They just weren't in active combat. So a lot like how we think about the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
Cold War wasn't direct boots on the ground fighting, and it was composed of many different smaller conflicts that did actually occur, but never between the U.S. and Russia directly, or the U.S. and the Soviet Union directly. But yeah, I mean, to them, this is not a new thing that's been happening for a short amount of time, even though it's pretty long to us even now. I mean, looking at how long there's been active conflict, and now in Ukraine, I mean, it's been over 2 years.
2 years. Do y'all think the rumors are true that the Ukrainians are deliberately going slow and very methodical because they don't want to seem like they're doing it too hasty because they think the world would think they're Russian into things?
They're Russian. Oh, yeah.
Maybe. You never know. I mean,
No, yeah. There's enough confusion as it is,
That's right.
Yeah. So that's amazing to me, though, because my mind is blown that not only has the Ukraine held off Russia, like we were
superpower.
talking about this briefly before we started recording, and I'm sure that Russia felt like they were just going to go in and annex. Russia is this world superpower. They have this, mighty military, and they were just going to go in and take Ukraine and just annex it, and it'd be over with. I'm sure that Putin expected it to be a very, very short, painless process. Basically, send in his awesome military and take over, and it'll be done. But Ukraine fought back, and not only did they put up a heck of a fight, but it's been going on for a long time, and now they're actually on the offensive against Russia, and that is just wild.
I think too, there's lessons in it too, like with Russia just thinking, I don't know, and we all thought that it would be over really quickly, but there's realities that had to be faced. Like Russia was not as conditioned or organized or prepared as the world thought they were, as they thought they were. I mean, I think they had initially some really big convoys just get stranded because they didn't have their fuel supply lines organized, or equipment failing and stuff, because there'd been a lot of corruption in the military, and so a lot of contracts were for maintenance of vehicles that never got done, and so then they're breaking down left and right. And there's things on paper, and then there's things in real life, and I think there was a lot of reckoning that had to be made in that regard. And I think that's one of the problems that goes on, I think, in a lot of our societies, including our own today, is there's things that we say versus there's things that are real. So.
Oh, definitely. Well, I mean, it reminds me of maybe it's definitely on the nose, but it's like 1984. It reminds me of how in 1984 it talks about how the government has to constantly say that they're producing more and say that they're making, progress on so many things and outproducing themselves year to year, and yet materially you see that that's not the case. But the problem is that propaganda in those higher ranks and within an oligarchical system feel true. You have to say that they're true, and you have to deny the reality of it. And it's also the same sometimes here in America. I mean, we are not immune to the same sins, although we don't really see it in the government as much as we see it in companies that need for their stocks to keep on growing. They want to keep growing year after year after year. So they have to say, oh, we're doing more and more and more. And it's like, what's the problem with being stable? What's so wrong? Exactly. What's so wrong about being able to year on year be stable and exist and be, a linchpin, be reliable?
So I think our world news segment is salient to our Come Follow Me lesson this week as well, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. Liking the scriptures unto ourselves.
Yeah, like a self-balancing scooter. That's a good segue.
There you go.
All right, Michael. I'm racking them up, man. We got to jump in somewhere.
Oh, I can't, man. You're like, it's impossible.
Can't keep up.
I gotta ask you, what's your system for that? Do you have a notepad document open in front of you with your?
If I was only,
I don't think he does. I think he's just got like a psychological Rolodex of dad jokes that are just there.
I do have some psychological something.
The next, let's talk about some church news. Go from the world news to church news. What we got going on church news, Average Joe?
Church news. So the one thing I had picked up earlier, there is something new that's kind of still developing. So I was looking for that, but couldn't find the references I wanted. So I'll revert to this out of the church newsroom today, August 14th. How the Book of Mormon inspired Kenneth Rooks to Olympic silver medal success. He was in the steeplechase race, which is a 3K obstacle course race, essentially is what it is. And he was, I don't want to say he was a nobody, but he wasn't expected to get the silver medal. To put it into reference, I think he's the 7th American to ever medal in the event. And that might be overstating it. I think it might be in a broader sense in the kind of that area of the Olympics. But let me look to see what it says here. He mentioned before running in the men's 3,000 meter steeplechase prelims of the 2024 Paris Olympics on Monday, August 5th, Kenneth Rooks worried he might not be able to compete with the top runners in his event. The 24-year-old returned Latter-day Saint missionary found comfort and inspiration in the Book of Mormon, specifically Alma chapter 26. In that chapter, Ammon glories in the Lord. When his brother Aaron rebukes him for boasting, though, Ammon replies, I know that I am nothing. As to my strength, I am weak. Therefore, I will not boast of myself, but I will boast of my God. For in his strength, I can do all things. He was in the lead for a while, and then only in the final 80 meters, did a runner from Morocco, who was the defending gold medalist, pass him up in the final 80 meters. But he said it was incredible. It was surreal. And he's the 7th American track and field athlete to win a medal in the Olympic men's 3,000 meter steeplechase. Only the 3rd American to win silver, and just the 2nd American since 1984 to medal in the event.
Wow,
that's intense.
Wow. Jeffrey R. Holland actually, I saw that he tweeted about that 3 days ago. He actually talked to him. He said he had the opportunity to visit by telephone with Olympian Kenneth Rooks. And then he talks about some of what you said, and he concludes it. I think this is really cool. He concludes it by saying, quote, my mind turns to the races that all of us run, those daily challenges and experiences that help us grow as children of God as we strive to be more like his son, Jesus Christ. It may not feel as if it comes with a medal or trophy, but we know that the prize is real. It is what Christ conveyed at the conclusion of the crucifixion when he said, it is finished. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. It's good stuff.
It is. It reminds me of a famous quote from a famous Alabamian. I just felt like running.
Jenny. I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
That's right. That's pretty good, actually, too.
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
Well, that was spot on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've been working on it.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on. Talk about what are the prophets saying, Rogue Bishop?
Well, I'm taking this instruction from President Nelson when he talks about the power of keeping covenants. And he gave this in the April 2024 General Conference Leadership Meeting. He says, too many families and leaders are more focused on mission calls and wedding festivities than on sacred covenants of the endowment and sealing ordinances. Too many people focus on the physical beauty of the temple and its furnishings rather than on the covenants that patrons enter into for themselves and their ancestors. The ordinances receive the spiritual strengthening that occurs in the temple. He says it's incumbent upon us that we do much more to help our people understand the power of the covenants. And I was thinking about that. We now have the covenants in like print. So the whole world, not just members of the church, the whole world can read what are the covenants that we make in the temple. What are those specific covenants? And we can look at them back and forth. And I think I wasn't really sure why we did that, but I think the intent is in this second paragraph when President Nelson says, if a man or woman is not ready or willing to keep the 5 covenants we make in the temple, they are not ready to receive their endowment. Which would mean that, hey, we should be talking about this. We should be teaching it. We should be letting our kids know about it so that people aren't going to the temple surprised and shocked and like, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't ready to make that covenant. You will now know what covenants that you're making before you even go to the temple. So if you're not willing to make those covenants, then in the words of President Nelson, you're not ready to receive your endowment.
Yeah, keep
and
preparing.
He says, yeah. And he says making covenants with God is one of the greatest privileges our Heavenly Father and his Son give to us in this mortal life. And And then he talks about the blessings and the moral and spiritual power that our people need right now and for the days ahead is the power of God the Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. We gain access to their power by making and keeping covenants with them. So I think a little bit of prophecy is going on right there in that last paragraph when he says that right now and for the days ahead, that's the power that we're going to need. So I think that we ought to, take that stuff to heart for sure.
Absolutely.
I know that was when the last major adjustments were made to the endowment. That my favorite adjustment was that the covenants are outlined clearly at the very beginning, because there's always been the section that says, if you're not prepared to enter these covenants, blah blah blah, and like how can you make a judgment call?
You can't, because you don't know what covenants are coming up.
That's why. Yeah, I love that the covenants are outlined very clearly, and they're now even print. There's the subtitles in the endowment video where everything is very clearly spoken and printed, so you know exactly what the covenants are that you are about to enter into, and you're able to make that informed decision. Am I ready to take this step? In my
there's a lot of ways where I missed the movie, but at the same time, I really enjoy the film strip better, and so does my wife, because every word is put on there, so you can read the words. It was really kind of funny because my wife, and I'm not going to embarrass her, but she saw something there that she said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that's what they were saying." She thought they were saying something else, and then so when it was spelled out, she goes, "Oh, okay." So
it's like when you look
cool.
up the lyrics to a song that you've been singing wrong forever.
You've been singing the wrong lyrics. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
We ready to move on? We'll move on to some parenting. There's a training that I've been doing. The whole thing, it's a 6-week course, and it's designed around attachment theory. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, attachment theory has to do with, exactly, duct tape or WD-40. But so no, when babies are born, they interact with their caregivers, and very early within the first really 2 years of life, a baby learns like how secure they are, as far as to their mother or caregiver. They develop what's called a secure attachment, and the secure attachment gives the child a sense of security. They know that they're safe. They know that if they're scared or frightened or hurt or whatever, then they know they're going to be taken care of. And if the parent is either
similar to in nature, with when the young are born in nature, whether it be birds or mammals or whatever, and they have that instant attachment to their mothers. Is that the same type of thing?
That's like imprinting.
Yeah,
it's actually not. It's a little bit different, because this is something that, as far as we know, is unique to humans. Because it develops within the first couple years of life, and so if the child does not develop a secure attachment, there's different types of insecure attachment. There's a avoidant, anxious avoidant attachment, or there's a disorganized attachment. And the thing is, when the child, because the parent either is inattentive or is like not providing what they need, maybe the parent has their own emotional issues, and when the baby cries, they lash out and they yell at the baby or something like that. Whatever, there's lots and lots of different ways that this cannot develop properly. But the thing is, if the attachment is not properly developed, it becomes a permanent part of your personality, basically. And so it carries over through all of adult life. And so there have been lots of longitudinal studies about this, where babies that have demonstrated the symptoms of insecure attachment have been followed through life, and they have way statistically higher incidences of divorce, of marital problems and problems in relationships. There's lots and lots of ways that that they're stuck in things that they can't get out of. They go all the way back to childhood, that we, up until, maybe 40 or 50 years ago, that nobody knew about. Nobody understood how these maladaptive behaviors that some people have can be traced back to the first 2 or 3 years of life that you can't even remember. So it's something that it's really interesting to get through, that, like for psychologists and stuff, because if you're talking to a therapist, it's not something that you can talk about. It's not something that can, a therapist can't say, so how was your relationship with your mother in the first 18 months of your life? It's because you don't remember that. Yeah. It's become part of who you are. And very, very few people have memories that go back. I think as far as people I've talked to, I think maybe 3 or 4 years old is the very earliest that anybody has any clear memories. I know my memories don't go back that far. And it was interesting to me going through school that I found out, I had a professor in grad school that said when she was practicing, one of the first questions she would ask people is, what age are your earliest clear memories? And that would give you a really good indication of childhood trauma, because when children go through traumatic events in their lives, early in life, our brain likes to protect us. So the brain, if the brain is not ready to deal with what's happening at that young age, then the brain will basically block it out. And my memories go back to about 7, as far as clear memories, that's about as far as I can remember. And I've always kind of thought that was normal. I just assumed that's how everybody was, until actually it wasn't until I was in grad school and I took this class and there was people talking about remembering, memories back to 4 and 5 years old. I'm like, well, really? So it was interesting to me because I did have some rough experiences in my own childhood. My father was an alcoholic and he tended to be very violent. And so there was a lot of kind of chaos and conflict because of that. And it's interesting how it wasn't until I was literally in my 40s in grad school that I understood how these things have affected me as an adult. And it's really interesting. But for me, I think there's 2 takeaways from this as far as parenting. Is number one, if you are the parent of a newborn or an infant, it is so critical that you have as much interaction with your baby as possible, as much positive interaction. Humans learn more in the first 2 years of life than all the rest of your life put together. So if you live to be 100 years old and you earn 5 PhDs, you will still never, ever learn as much as you learned in the first 2 years of your life. Because the first 2 years is when your brain has the maximum development, when the brain learns about everything, about the reality you live in, about, relationships. So it's like physically, socially, everything. And
yeah, but Kenny, the problem is I can't remember the first 2 years.
Yeah, that's tough.
Talking about going back to your first clear memories, that was about a month ago for me. It gets cloudy behind that.
So if you are parents of young children, the interactions between the caregivers and the baby, the face to face, like how when your baby, you make a silly face at the baby and the baby smiles and laughs, and those kind of back and forth interactions are actually crucial to their psychological and emotional development. And if they don't have that, as a matter of fact, that reminds me too, there's been not research done, but there's been inadvertent knowledge gained when there's been incidences of war. And I can't remember, there was one incident, I can't remember where it was, but there was a lot of orphans. There was a lot of people that died. There was a military conflict going on. And so there was a large orphanage where there was hundreds and hundreds of orphans, and there was only a handful of adults to care for them. And the belief at that time was that these babies will be okay as long as their physical needs are taken care of. As long as we change their diapers and they're fed, they'll be fine. So that's all that was done. These babies were given, they were fed well, their diapers were changed, their physical needs were taken care of. But these babies started dying, and they couldn't figure out why. And it turns out that for humans, at least, and this is where humans are unique to any other animal, is babies don't just, it's not just healthy for a baby to have interaction with adults. It's actually crucial. Like a baby can literally die if they do not get that interaction with adults and with other people. If they're isolated, the brain does not develop, and they can, if they do survive it, it can cause severe problems, which is the second takeaway from this is that a lot of people that we encounter in life, a lot of people that we feel like we might just think they're jerks or they're dummies or whatever, these people just blah, blah, blah. It's kind of helped me feel like the ability to give people a little bit more grace sometimes, because a lot of people that are very difficult to deal with, that, exhibit personality traits that are really off-putting or, really difficult to get along with, are that way because of their first 2 years of development. And, those things become ingrained. And so that's just another little thing to keep in mind that I thought was interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, man.
Kind of reminds me of a quote from the movie The Help.
Oh, that's a good movie. What part?
She was interacting. I can't remember the characters' names, but it was the young girl that decided to be the ghostwriter. What was?
I can't remember the names.
I think she had red hair.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was talking to her. Supposedly, I don't think they were boyfriend and girlfriend yet at the time. They ended up splitting up, but it was a really rough encounter in the very beginning. It was kind of set up, that meeting, and he was full of himself and a jerk. And do you remember that kid?
Yeah.
Anyway, I remember on the porch.
Were they kind of trying to set up? They were setting him up on a date or something.
People were trying to set him up. Yeah. Not just a date, but that it would go.
Yeah.
Anyway, she turned to him at one point and said, did your mama drop you on your head when you were a baby, or are you just stupid? You guys remember that quote?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a great movie. Yep. Y'all listen.
I never really thought about that. Kenny, that interaction for a baby is just as vital as nutrients. Just as vital as food. And in fact, it is a nutrient and it is a food, but we wouldn't think of it that way. But maybe that's, what we need to think of it, because if they're starving for that and they actually need that, just like they would need nutrition, and maybe help us be a little bit more cognizant of giving that to them. Yeah.
How has that impacted your interpretation of or your appreciation of the family proclamation, the proclamation of the family? So I think that's key. I mean, you're talking about all the same stuff, what children need, not just what's optimal, what they need. Mm-hmm. It's there.
I was just thinking about, I think we sometimes have that same twisted focus sometimes within the gospel, within the church. Sometimes we think about things in terms of this personal, what nutrients, what are the base needs that I have, right? And I think that's great, because it's realizing, like, we see a lot of parallels between us and maybe animals, right? Of course, we're very much similar to them in a lot of the ways that we are mortal, and in the ways that our mortality works, very similar. And yet at the same time, we know that we fit into a familial relationship with God, right? That God is our Heavenly Father. And then we also know that we go to the temple to have this sealing power with our families here on earth as well. Right, and we form these links in the chain, and we become part of this family, this great interconnected chain and web of families. And very often we end up boiling things down to, okay, what about your personal testimony? What about your personal, maybe nutrition and are the clothing, these base needs? And yes, they're necessary, right? If you starve a child, that's also not good. Not to throw those things away, but a lot of the time then we depromote. We don't properly understand the importance of creating families, of marriage, and of raising our children and becoming sealed, and that's not just something that's sort of mechanically forced upon us. That's not just like, oh, that's the deal with mortality. That's not just kind of rules of a game that you're playing. It is fundamental, and it is extremely important to us as humans, both mortally and spiritually, both in terms of our physicality, and as well
that's Jacob.
nature.
That's something that's so. It's so cool that you said that, because it's funny. It's hilarious to me that when you and I started to talk a minute ago, we both kind of started to say something at the same time. I was going in the same direction. Like I was going to say that, what I was just talking about could be an analogy for our spiritual lives. And, the way, just like Michael said, that interaction with our parents, that is just as essential for our health as nutrients. And I was going to kind of say that's an analogy of God. Our relationship with God is something that we can't neglect. If we neglect that and we just focus on just our temporal needs, and we don't have that spiritual connection with God, then we're missing out on something, and that can cause problems. There's tons of data to support this. And it's very interesting that even within psychology and stuff, there's religion is considered to be a strength. Like whenever you're, anybody that has a strong religious conviction, or, is a member of a faith community, you almost always will have better outcomes psychologically, emotionally, and I've even heard of physically. Joe, you've probably heard of that too. Like the people who have a strong spiritual foundation or are members of a faith community are psychologically, emotionally, and physically healthier.
Are you talking about the 2000 Stripling Warriors?
Uh-huh.
There you go.
Good point, Jacob. Thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
So we ready to get into some Come Follow Me then?
Let's do it.
Sure.
Heck yeah.
Let's do it.
Pick it.
All right.
All right, man. This week we are in the book of Alma, chapters 53 through 63. And the title of the lesson is Preserved by His Marvelous Power. And I think Rogue Bishop was going to read the intro for us.
So when compared with the Lamanite armies, Helaman's little army of young men shouldn't have stood a chance. Besides being a few in number, Helaman's soldiers were all very young, and they never had fought. In some ways, their situation might seem familiar to those of us who sometimes feel outnumbered and overwhelmed in our latter-day battle against Satan and the forces of evil in the world. But the army of Helaman had some advantages over the Lamanites that had nothing to do with the numbers or military skill. They chose Helaman, a prophet, to lead them. They had been taught by their mothers that if they did not doubt, God would deliver them. And they had exceeding faith in that which they had been taught. As a result, they were protected by the miraculous power of God. So in facing life's battles, we can take courage. Helaman's army teaches us that there is a just God, and whosoever does not doubt will be preserved by his marvelous power.
Excellent.
Excellent. So yeah, we have got, this week is a massive reading, 10 chapters.
So who's reading the first chapter?
Oh my goodness, no, we're not doing that.
Chapter by chapter and read the whole thing. Everybody buckle in. It's going to be a 4-hour episode.
All-nighter.
Rogue is out.
All right.
Yeah, I think this is, I really love the introduction. I just had a couple comments on it. And this isn't anything that I haven't said before. I just love Elder Bednar's talk when he talks about, keep in mind that we can have the faith to move mountains, and we can have childlike faith, and that can be not wavering, and faith to be healed and faith to heal, and the same type of thing that happened with the young stripling warriors here. But that also Elder Bednar reminds us that it still has to be within God's timing and within God's will. Because he reminds us, Elder Bednar reminds us in that talk that not everybody will be healed, and that not everything will be conquered, and not every person will be cured, and not every person will live, and that has nothing to do with your faith. So the thing is make sure that when you're preserving that faith and that you have that faith, that if for whatever reason something doesn't work out like you had hoped or that you had faith that it would, has nothing to do with whether you had strong enough faith. Don't start self-doubting. Has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the Lord's will and the Lord's timing. So I think the biggest thing is trying to figure out what is the Lord's will. We can, which is the definition of prayer itself. When you look in the Bible dictionary and read about what prayer, it defines prayer as not us trying to convince God to come to our will, but it's actually us trying to figure out what is God's will in this situation or whatever it is that we're praying for. Is it God's will that we be healed, or is it God's will that we, that we not be healed and we move on to another part of our life with our testimony still on our lips, nothing doubting, nothing wavering. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Michael.
I just recently came across an interview. Someone was doing an interview with the Special Forces community, and there was, and I can't remember his name. I believe he's a U.S. Navy SEAL who was killed in the line of duty. And he was a very religious person, which is a bit of a rarity. Typically, the guys get a bit hardened, and they're not, even if they were brought up religious, they're not as devout throughout life. But this gentleman was, and he was killed. And a lot of them took that hard. They're like, he was, the best among us. Not just a really good soldier, but a really, really good person. Why? And they struggled with it. Why would God do that to one of his own, one of these, upright individuals? And this gentleman said he was having a really hard time with it. And then the chaplain that was assigned to their group called them all together, all these, grizzled war fighters. And in a moment where they're all kind of on edge, already angry, and now you've got this chaplain calling them all together, and they're getting ready to kind of have a battle with him. And he said, "I want to read you this soldier's his last words of why you're here today." And it essentially became his written testimony to them that if he were to die, that it was his instructions that the chaplain call them all together and tell them all that it didn't change his faith, and that he knew Jesus was the Christ, and all this stuff. And he said it finally hit him, and it softened his heart that this dude lived his life in such a way that even his death brought people, maybe the hardest of hard people, closer to Christ. And he said, what a testimony that was, essentially. And I thought, man, that's intense, because to your point, we may pray that, that this let this cup pass from us, and it may not, but that still doesn't change that it can help us and help others if we let it.
True that, just like Alma and Amulek, when they witnessed all the women and children being burned, right? It didn't change the faith. Didn't change the faith of those women and children. They knew where they were going to go. Right. So just something to keep in mind, that if something doesn't go your way, doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't love you. Doesn't mean he didn't answer your prayer, and it certainly doesn't mean that you didn't have enough faith. So keep on keeping on.
That's right.
That's right.
Keep on striving.
All right. So in verse 13, it said, "But it came to pass when they saw the danger and the many afflictions and tribulations which the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion and were desirous to take up arms in the defense of their country. But behold, as they were about to take their weapons of war, they were overpowered by the persuasion of Helaman and his brethren, for they were about to break the oath which they had made." So this is really it's funny because I literally just got chills, because this is so powerful to me, because they made a covenant to God that they would never shed blood again, that they weren't going to fight, they weren't going to kill, that they weren't, and they're in this situation where their families and their community are in immediate danger, and they're like, "Oh, it's time to fight. We have to fight." And
not only in
feel.
Yeah, Kenny, not only in danger, but can you imagine, as you're talking about this and as I read it, can you imagine being there and seeing people dying on your behalf, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Laying
Mhm.
down their own lives to try to protect you while you're doing nothing. That would be
Yes.
hard.
Yes,
Super
I can't
hard.
even imagine.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So I don't think that they just like, well, we're going to break our covenants. I don't think it was like that. I think like what the point that you're trying to bring up, Kenny, is that, man, this took some serious thought, and they just like, no, we can't do this anymore. We can't keep letting people die on our behalf, and we do nothing.
Yeah.
Well, especially because the Ammonites took this covenant kind of upon themselves. This is not. I mean, the Nephites are doing it. These faithful people, as we see, then the stripling warriors, the stripling soldiers, also faithful, also God fearing, also all these different things, and they end up going to war. But the Ammonites, have this covenant they've taken upon themselves in this sort of special way, and it is set apart in a real sense. It is something that isn't generally applicable. There's not like a commandment against it. So in that moment, you're thinking, oh my gosh, well, I mean, yes, we made this oath, right? We promised to do this, but was that right? Of course, maybe this is a different situation, but Helaman comes in and says, no, it will be much more powerful, so much more powerful for you to remain true to your word, remain true to your oath, and remain, keep that oath that you swore valid, and be, have this integrity to
so they were feared that they would lose their souls because they had made this, even though it's kind of like, to me, this is different, but it almost reminds me of things like the word of wisdom, and like, I know people sometimes wonder about that. Well, why don't you drink what's wrong with coffee? The fact is it's something that I have, a covenant not to do. It doesn't really matter. It's like, just with them, it's like they would have had every right to take up arms to defend themselves, especially when other people were dying on their behalf. But the fact is, we have made a covenant with God. We have promised God this is something we're not going to do. And they honored that. And then here's the thing that this is where it gets good, man. In verse 16, but behold, it came to pass, they had many sons who had not entered into a covenant, that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore, they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and called themselves Nephites. And then verse 18, now behold, there were 2,000 of these young men who entered into this covenant and took their weapons of war to defend their country.
That's bigger than Hoboken, man. 2,000. That's bigger than Hoboken, Georgia.
And we don't know how old the warriors were, but
it said they were young.
It says they're young. Yeah. So basically, these, I would imagine that they're teenagers. They're probably, the cultures at that time. There was no such thing as adolescence. There was, you were a child until you got to a certain age, and then there was,
from 12 up to 19. That whole range right there.
Yeah. So, and if you have, there's the Book of Mormon videos. The one for this lesson, if you have not watched it, I highly recommend it. I watched it today at work when I was alone in my office, but I have my door open so people walk down the hall and talk to me. And I was just kind of had my phone sitting off to the side, kind of watching this video while I was working on the computer. And I literally teared up, man. I started crying. It's so powerful.
Great video.
Oh my gosh. The video is so powerful. The way it depicts these young men and the dedication that they have and the courage they have and the faith that they have. It is absolutely amazing.
You got to think too, the faith of the parents. You guys just brought up kind of the harrowing situation they were in of being attacked and feeling the need to defend themselves and kind of withholding on that because they had taken an oath. Now you have other people defending them and dying because of it. And meanwhile, you're doing nothing to defend yourself. So that's adding increased pressure to break your oath. Mm-hmm. They are persuaded to not break their oath. But now the solution is send your sons to fight in your place.
Your little boy.
Well, now that abides by the oath, but now it's your sons who are going to go put their life on the line for you. Yeah, imagine the faith.
Who are potentially going to die. Yeah, and there was no way for them to know that their sons weren't going to die in this.
But imagine how that ties into their oath of, okay, we've made this covenant with you. We've made this oath, and we're really showing this faith that you're going to protect our kids, because we're doing everything that we can to abide by what we have agreed on, everything that we can to honor you, God. And so please watch over our children. I mean, the sincerity, you can feel it coming through the verses, you know, in their faith and in their belief and their prayers. You won't find more sincere prayers, I don't think.
Oh my goodness. I just had a thought, and it may be wrong, but this almost seems like an Abraham and Isaac situation on a much bigger scale.
Oh,
Sure.
Oh, I've never thought about that.
Neither did I till just now.
Wow.
So I give the credit to the Holy Ghost, not me.
There you go.
It really is. Because they were like Joe just said. I mean, all they had to go on was faith that the Lord would protect them, but there was no guarantee. I mean, for all they knew, they were all sending their sons to die.
Yep.
And they had to have faith that the Lord was going to protect them. And wow, yeah.
And not only that, but even the young men, their faith of going, saying, we're going to help you and keep this covenant, and God's going to help us.
And they must have had some great mamas, because they kept quoting, hey, our mamas told. I think I cut you off, Jacob. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was done.
It said, Mama said, knock you out.
Yeah. No, but I was just thinking, I mean, going back, I mean, I think this really loops in. I'm really glad that you talked about attachment, Kenny, because really, I mean, this is secure attachment. This is kind of how parents make it so that, you know, this is not overprotective. Of course, the fathers in this scenario, right? They had seen war. That's why they had to make the covenant. They had seen war. They'd engaged in so much violence before. They were used to it in a real sense, you know, and then they had moved away from it, but they were wanting to take things back up again because they might be able to kind of, in some sense, maybe redeem themselves and use this ability, use this experience for something good. But they had made the oath and they should keep that oath. So then it's now trusting your sons, you know, these people, these children, you know, maybe not any more children, but your children that you want to protect and you want to give the best life and you want to do all these different things for, and you want to provide for, letting them go out, right? And letting them go and take this risk and trusting in God and trusting in them. Both, right? So you're trusting in God to protect them. You're trusting in God to guide them, and then you're trusting your children to listen to that guidance, right? And listen to Helaman, their commander, and also listen to God, which the mothers are constantly. I mean, we don't actually see, I guess, the mothers saying this, but we hear from the stripling warriors constantly. You know, we know what our mothers said. We know that they knew what was happening. They knew that this was true, and I mean, even to that point of like, you know, the parents didn't know. I think the mothers wouldn't have said it if they didn't know, if they weren't moved to give that promise that they will all come back on the condition that they have faith. And then they trusted their sons to have faith. They trusted them to go out and be independent. And that's a big part of secure attachment, right? Is to make a human person that can be, to the degree that it's necessary, independent. Of course, not totally independent, but to move out, to kind of leave the role of little hatchling child baby that needs to be infantilized and to actually become and flower out into an adult, you know, bloom in a sense.
So that is a perfect, absolutely perfect kind of introduction to one of the reasons that I really wanted you to be on with us this evening, Jacob, because your mom did a really good job. I did the same thing with you. Obviously she was able to develop a secure attachment with you because you have been able to do all those things. You've been able to go out in the world. And so why don't you share a little bit with us about how do you feel like, so a lot, it's funny because a lot of things you were saying, I know I've heard your mom talk about how she has been intentional, you know, about trying to, even when you were younger, like she's told me about how she would like send you into the grocery store by yourself and stuff like that, you know, which is difficult for her, but she was very intentional about wanting you to develop a sense of independence and self-assurity. So how do you feel, Jacob, that the way that your mother taught you has influenced you to be able to live the life that you have lived. You served a mission. You're currently a student at BYU. You're rocking it. You're doing great. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny. Earlier, you kind of mentioned about this idea of when your first memories are. I'm very much on Joe's side of things, where I'm like, I don't know, man. I've got very patchy memories, very blurry memories. I mean, when we talk about stuff, sometimes you get frustrated, right? You're like, what do you mean you don't remember this? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. You'll start talking to me about brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so, this thing that happened. And I'm like, you're going to need to like tell me the whole story again, because I just don't know what's going on. So as far as, quoting exact things, I do remember, being sent in to, go grocery shopping and stuff like that. I remember, it's becoming a rare thing nowadays, but when I was younger too, I mean, I had a bike and was allowed to just like roam around the neighborhood and stuff like that. There wasn't a pack of kids like back in maybe the 80s. I've heard, there'd be these roaming children that would do things.
That's how I was when I was a kid. I had
my
my group of friends and we'd ride our bikes all over town every day.
Yeah, it wasn't like that for me, because nowadays, everybody wants to keep everything safe, and so they're so scared about what will happen to kids outside. And I think, it's very rational in one sense, because a lot can happen outside. But I think in the same way, developmentally, you have to get out. You can't be in the house all the time. And I was a bit of a homebody, but she pushed me out. Like naturally, I was a bit more, okay, well, I don't know where I don't have places to go or whatever, like doing stuff. But yeah, I mean, and it came out then too, as I got older in school. There's, whether like parent teacher conferences or even just teachers communicating and stuff like that, teachers would want maybe more presence from her. But like she advocated every single time for, like, if I didn't do my work, I would be like lazy in school. If I didn't do my homework, give me a 0. That's what happens. If he doesn't do it, punish him for it. Like, or just not punish, but just give him the consequences of that. And I love that. I mean, I'm so glad that I got to experience the consequences of the world and didn't have a shield. But at the same time, was not, of course, I wasn't, fully left out to fend for myself. I wasn't a 6-year-old in the middle of the desert with nobody to help me or whatever. It felt extremely developmentally appropriate, or I don't know exactly if it was. Sometimes I think about when I was first born and so like that, was doing her master's program and things in education. She's talked about how she was kind of testing the stuff that she was being taught to do for a year or two above my age, but she's doing it on me because I was just, I was a perfect little practice dummy. So I don't know.
You were her guinea pig.
Exactly. But in that way, I think I was being asked to perform at a developmentally advanced level a lot of the time too. Like, hey, why don't you try to do this? Now, in some ways, I mean, I'm still a person. I'm a 22-year-old kid, basically, right? I'm 22 years old now, and I still, of course, don't have everything together. And I'm in college and I'm figuring things out. But I think it gives a great confidence to know, I can ask for help. There is somebody there to ask for help, and there is support, and I can rely on that in many ways. Right, which is some other, insecure attachment can mean that you never rely on anybody, right? But at the same time, insecure attachment can mean that I'm clinging, and I need it all the time. And at the same, no, I don't. I can just try. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm gonna just before I out here, I'm gonna push a little bit and see what I can do and see what I can figure out before I ask for help, right? So I'm gonna see how far I can get before I need, mommy to help me.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Jacob. As far as I know, when you were younger, there was a period of time where you were kind of antagonistic about religion and the church, and it was kind of a dark time there for a little while. And but you came out of that, and you actually chose to serve a mission and went to Germany. And when you left for your mission, Jacob, you were the first missionary from our ward in several years. It was, we hadn't had any missionaries out of our ward in a long time. And so it wasn't like you had any other examples around you of people who were, that you knew that were going off to serve missions. but you still chose to do that. You made the decision. You were the first young man in quite a few years that chose to serve a mission. And so what do you think, or what aspects of the way that your mother raised you and taught you do you think helped you to have the courage and the faith to step out and do the things that you've done so far?
I think it's something, I think there's like a couple parts of it. So for one thing, it's just the way that she approached it was, to me, very good for me. I can't speak that this would be universally good for everybody, but good for me in the sense that, I still had to go to church, even though I was being really kind of pissy about it or whatever.
A poopy face, maybe, as your mom would call it.
Huh?
Your mom would say you were being a little poopy face during that time.
Yeah, a little poopy face, a little anger, maybe anger about it. But I still had to go to church. I still had to go to like seminary in high school. Oh my gosh, that was horrible. Or whatever. Yeah, I hate it, for parts of it, and all these different things. But really, I mean, it in a large way, it was still my choice to. How I felt about it was my choice, right? Like, she wasn't saying, have faith, have testimony, be this. I need you to say this way or whatever. Like, it was still, I felt like there was still enough freedom to figure things out. And I was just actually listening to the last episode that y'all recorded just earlier today, just to refresh, how especially formatting, but as well just to kind of get back into the context of what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. And I loved the portion on parenting, as you talked about last time, Rogue Bishop, and and I really think it plugs in a lot of ways, in the sense, like, for instance, last week you talked about how if you talk to your kids about something, then they'll say, oh, well, you made the mistake, so I'll make it too. I'm my own person, right? And if you say, well, I think you should do this, not this, or whatever, then they'll say, well, I'm not you, right? Mm-hmm. And in some sense. And in a real way, I mean, this story is a great example of they're not their parents, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't make that up. If just because you as a parent went through something and did this, that doesn't necessarily translate onto the child, right? They didn't have the baggage of their parents. And that was the great thing. And I think that's the great thing that we see in this story of the stripling warriors is how, the cleansing and healing power of Christ can move generationally as well. So the parents were healed, but still needed something. They still needed this limitation. That limitation no longer existed for the children because they took the right steps. And it reminds me of the adage of, like, strong men create good times, good times create strength. But this is an example of strong men and strong people, the Ammonites, creating good times, creating strong children, right? And we see later on in the Book of Mormon, as we'll get to later in the year, like in 3rd Nephi, we see, how long you can have an unbroken chain of strength in Christ, or you can be constantly healing, and you don't have to go through those low periods. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have catastrophic periods just to learn something. Mm-hmm. And I think, having my mother, who I have a lot of the same issues as she does, and she approached things, in a way that wasn't, it wasn't always, maybe sometimes I don't remember exactly how I felt. Maybe I felt a little patronized about it, but I don't remember feeling so patronized about when she would, when we really related to each other in terms of anxiety, in terms of problems with depression and stuff like that. And that gave me a backing. And as far as another point on it too, so she made me keep going, and that was a great stability. That the church was a stable place, was a stable community. It was something that I was part of, even when I wasn't really, worthy. I mean, not that I wasn't worthy of it, but like that I wasn't really actively being good in. That I was actually kind of maybe even toxic to.
So your mom wasn't just telling you to be good; she was modeling. She was modeling it for you as well, right? She was going to church, and she was doing all the things, and she was living her life in such a way to be that example for you. And that's, I really like what you said about your mom doing what was right for you, which might not have been right for everybody. And I can imagine that with the stripling warriors, their mothers probably were all very different, because every one of those young men had different people with different personalities. And so there probably was no cookie cutter method of raising a child that they would do. So these mothers probably all did raise their children in slightly different ways, but they gave their sons what they needed personally in order to have that faith and that courage to do what they did.
Yeah, and I mean, and in that same way that was an independence within the church too. I mean, I still had to go, so I was still touched in. I didn't have some lapse that I really needed to. It wasn't a mountain that I had to climb to get back in, right? That was great. The door stayed open, which was so important, because I don't know if I would have ever come back if I had been able to stop. If I was able to completely leave and build up a bunch of walls, how hard would it be to break down those walls? I wouldn't, even if someday it worked out, it wouldn't have worked out like it did. Definitely. But on the other hand, here she comes walking through. She's giggling.
Hi, Megan.
You want to walk in to frame for a second?
I wrote the quote, "Little hatchling child baby."
Yeah, yeah. Look.
Well, there she is. There's Megan.
Daddy was not just a little hatchling child baby.
Yeah. There we go.
All right. Way to go. Keep talking.
No, I mean, another big part, I think, was, I mean, how she modeled what faithfulness could look like, and it doesn't look exactly the same as kind of other pictures that I had in my mind when I was so against it, because I kind of had this idea that you had to be sort of holier than thou, and you had to be all these different, you had to be above it all. And I mean, you don't, right? Like day to day, you don't. And in order to go on a mission, you don't. And so seeing, some people go until maybe even their 20s or 30s. Some people go their whole lives, kind of with this image of their parents in their head as these larger than life beings, these gods that tower over them, really, when they're tiny little kids, these huge people that know everything. And some people have that shattered. And instead I got to really get to know, I got to know, I got to know my mom and be honest about it and see her as a person, and then see how I could fit in as a person, within my family, within the church, within all these different things, even when I struggle with parts of it.
That's incredible, Jacob. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Wow.
Seriously.
You brought up, you mentioned like generations or the differences in the kind of the people and stuff like that. It reminded me even of this story, how different it is. The one constant is the faith, I think, because if you think about it, the parents were exposed to war. They were almost, like a bloodlust kind of situation. That's why they had to swear it off forever. Right. And then they raise their kids essentially in pacifist households, like we will never touch weapons kind of situation. And lo and behold, guess what the solution is? Hey kids, pick up weapons, and yet that was the path for the kids. The path the parents was a bad path. They go to a different path, and yet the kids, the right path is to go and fight. And it's interesting. Someone once said, and I'm sure they got it off of some movie I never saw or what, but a youth actually said it. They said, violence is not the answer, which you've heard that many times. Violence is not the answer, but sometimes it's the question, and the answer is yes. I thought, man, that is golden,
that is,
that's true. Like, you shouldn't be looking for a fight, but if one comes looking for you, sometimes the answer is yes, and I thought about that with these guys, how different it is with generations, that you may raise your kids as pacifists, but their time is not your time. Like maybe you, to your point, your mother raised you to be able to leave the nest and be equipped for your time, for the challenges you face. And that's different than the challenges Kenny grew up riding his bike all over the world, when he grew up in the late 1900s. And, a different world, and so you got to prepare your kids for the world they live in, not the world you grew up in.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting takeaway too.
That's a good point. Yeah, I like that. And the mothers, not only did they raise their sons right, not only did they teach them correct principles and model the righteousness for them, But something else that stands out to me is when the young men started stepping forward, the mothers didn't object.
Right. That's
something that,
a good point.
That's something that in the video, in the church video, that like one of the things that really got me was like when the young boys, they were all like, their moms were with them because they were kids, you know. I mean, these were literally, like you said, anywhere from maybe 12 to 18 or 19 years old, and their moms are with them, and they step forward. Their moms are like, "Oh crap!" But they don't, they don't stop them. They don't grab them by the arm and say, "Heck no, you're not going to go die in this battle." Or they allowed their sons to step forward and take that responsibility and be men.
They saw their kids grow up that day.
They did.
It's like, and which can be like it can be, oh my gosh, and oh my gosh, all at the same time, right?
Definitely.
I know we're running, seems like a little bit long, but I wanted to bring up in chapter 58, and I think in 61 too. There was something I don't know why. I mean, I'm just average Joe. It never occurred to me. Helaman kind of gripes a little bit about kind of supplies and troops and stuff being withheld.
Yeah.
And then
gets into some politics there about the government not following through, and
sure, yeah, like kind of leaving him out to dry. He's being treated with unfairly, essentially, and I think he rightfully so could say, well, hey, what the heck's the deal? We're out here defending the country. Least you could do is send us supplies and people to do the job that we're doing. We're out here risking everything. At least give us what we need to do the job. I think that's fair, but in the end, he doesn't badmouth people. He just says, hey, something's not right, but ultimately God will take care of us.
Yep.
And I mean, I think that's a wonderful example. And then Pahoran, right? So he was kind of getting thrown under the bus a little bit, right? By Moroni. Same kind of thing.
Just like, a little bit, just like, it was a big old slap.
Yeah. Like it was kind of like he left a little if in there, right? if he's withholding. But then it's like bam, 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 but I said if, so he's kind of getting laid out, even though it's not really his fault, and he could
not even close to being his fault.
Correct, and he could have taken that very badly to be like, you come at me like you don't even know the stuff I've been dealing with, and you think it's me?
Are you serious? Yeah.
Right. And I never really had considered both of these situations in the light that they could have been offended. I mean, that's a word we use a lot these days, but they could have been offended out of their position, out of their side, out of their commitment, out of their calling, falsely accused or unsupported, a mismatch on your beliefs versus what's being provided, your leadership forsaking you. Those things have led so many people away, and yet they provide great examples of what we should do. And Helaman ultimately trust in God, and then Pahoran of committing to the work, forgiving quickly, explaining the situation and forgiving quickly. Don't take offense. It's a choice to take offense, and you don't have to. I thought that was a couple of really cool things I'd never really considered in that light before that came up in the lesson.
Yeah, that is a really great point. Yeah, Pahoran really provides an excellent example for all of us.
Definitely, and that's actually that reminds me. I mean, it is outlined in the lesson as well for under the teaching. Teaching is for children, right? Like talking about you can choose not to be angry. I mean, it's an idea for children, right? A lot of the time, but at the same time, I mean, just because it's a lesson for children doesn't mean that a lot of us don't need to work on it, right? Like a lot of us probably missed out on that lesson when we were kids, and could use a little. Hey, you could choose not to be angry. You can choose even when you're being falsely accused, as Pahoran was. Recognize that that Moroni is on your side, that he is upset about some failure. And of course, it's in a sense, it really is misdirected at Pahoran, but at the same time, recognizing, hey, man, it is a real problem, and we need to, I don't need to be angry about this. It's not going to fix it. This sort of infighting, getting offended, getting up in arms about this disrespect. that really kind of has taken place isn't actually productive at all,
Right.
It's not easy though.
No.
I know for me that I would not have been Pahoran.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now. I'm not good.
Kenny, there's a lot of us that would not have been Pahoran in that situation.
He'd have been pouring some hate back on him.
Be pouring it on.
That's right.
Of course, at the same time, Captain Moroni was pretty bad. So, I mean, it's like, do you really want to get super mad back? I mean,
That's
right.
I mean, it's Captain Moroni. I'm just saying.
Captain Moroni. So it's like,
I don't want him to go all Captain Moroni on me either. So I'm going to maybe hold back a little.
Right. Pahoran's like, if he was here right now, I'd be telling him this stuff. And then he reads the room and he's like, he's right behind me, isn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh man, that's awesome.
All right, man. So what else do we have from this lesson this week?
Well, there's a ton that we could talk about, but I'm about spent.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say this all over again. I really appreciated Jacob being on here with us and all his insight and all of his comments. It was really good, Jacob. We really enjoyed having you, and thanks for being on here with us and sharing everything that you did. Very insightful.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad that I heard about this opening in the podcast. I mean, I think if there was one thing I would leave with personally, as this is my only appearance or whatever, this is a one-off maybe. So
you've been on the podcast before. This isn't your.
I've been, but I've never been a guest yet. I've never been a
guest host.
Sure, whatever. But like, it just keeps on resounding in my head. Like, there's an amazing thing, and I think it's such an important thing. Parents, such an important role to fill, right? Like, and it's never something that should be phoned in. Neither. Of course, a lot of the time we highlight, and I think rightly so, we highlight and we promote the roles of mothers, but also the roles of fathers. This is never something that you should feel like as a parent you're sort of outside of, right? That you're not material to, right? That you don't have a place in. And I think you can see that because in a real way, when you have kids, they are kind of like mini yous. A lot of their traits come from you. Really, I mean, I can see in myself so much of like where I get things from my mother, and where I get things from my dad and stuff like that, and of course from all other influences in life as well. But I mean, these are real forces that occur, and at the same time, we also see how children are not their parents, and that is not a denigration of parenthood. That's not denigration of the relationship. But that is the point of the relationship. It's a relationship between two people who are not the same. And so we see our children, and a lot of the times we might have this sort of, shrugging, who am I to judge? They're a totally different person. It's a total, roll a dice crapshoot on what you're going to get. And it kind of is in a lot of ways, right? You don't know what you're going to get as far as a personality goes. And at the same time, you kind of have some guidelines about what's going to happen. Because, I mean, really, you're part of the puzzle. So, there's some amount of predictability there. But they are living a new life, and they are a new person. And so at the same time, allowing for that, you don't want to go, I think it's dosage makes the poison, right? You don't want to be totally, it can't be hands off all the way, right? Or otherwise they, are touch starvation and they, fall apart in that way. And you also can't be a parent too protective and stuff like that. Because then they just won't develop. They can't become an adult. And it's sort of on the point of the stripling warriors, right? Like the mothers saw their children become adults in that moment because they rose to the occasion. But at the same time, that's the fruits of letting their children mature, helping their children mature, being this amazing, participating in this amazing incubation process for a new person who isn't, beholden to the problems that you had. Right. Who isn't necessarily, and it's the same way. I think it's a beautiful thing with baptism and confirmation that it isn't just the case that you're born into it, and all of a sudden now from as soon as you pop out, like you're beholden to all the rules. Of course, morality is morality, but like at the same time, at a certain point, you take it upon yourself. You take the name of Christ upon yourself as an individual. You actively become part of the community. You actively, choose to do this. You exercise your own agency, and I think that's an incredibly important thing. And I think it is. It's a hard balancing act. And yeah, I mean, I really can't speak much to it. I only know it from the angle that everybody knows it, which is being a child. So I can't really speak to the parenting part of it at all.
Well, for sure. I mean, you brought out, I like the fact that you brought those things out, because I think one of the tricks, and if probably using the wrong word when I say trick, but I think one of the biggest things that I'm getting out of what you're talking about is, when you're trying to find that balance as a parent, is you got to let your kids suffer consequences. You can't protect them from consequences of choices, and there's good consequences and there's bad consequences. But I really like the point that you bring that out, and I think that's the biggest thing that I'm getting out of this anyway, as far as trying to find the happy median in between too overprotective and not protective enough, or in their lives too much and not in their lives at all.
Good deal.
Balance.
Any final thoughts, Joe? You got any massive quotes to drop on us before we wrap this one up?
I had brought it up. I don't know that it quite fits, but I will share it, because it does, to me, show the sentiment of parents to their children, especially in times of war. And pays wonderful homage to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And in a way, it ties into a bit of politics. This was written a long time ago by a U.S. president. It says, "Dear Madam, I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement of the Adjutant General of Massachusetts that you are the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any word of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, Abraham Lincoln."
Wow.
I think how poetically he wrote, and I think also significantly he wrote that in November. Let me see if I've got the date. I may have the date. November 21st, 1864. And the timing was such that his advisors wanted this to be released or leaked or whatever to the papers to help him in his reelection campaign. And he refused. He sent it afterwards, when it offered him no political benefit, but to share his sentiments with this mother. I thought was really touching.
Awesome. Yep, that's what I was hoping for right there. That's a good note to end on right there. So we're going to wrap it up for this week. So until next
keep
time,
on striving.
Y'all keep on striving.
From the south. Come on.